Welcome to today's Masterclass Explainer. We're going to act as philosophical detectives today, investigating the absolute ultimate nature of existence. I am so glad you're here. Look, today we aren't just going to sit around and memorize facts. No, we're actually going to train our minds to see the world completely differently. We're asking the biggest question out there. What is everything made of? And I don't just mean physically, I mean fundamentally. So here's our game plan for this explainer. First up, the foundation of reality. Then we'll hit monism and pluralism, followed by ancient atomic theories. After that, it's Plato and the cave, and we'll wrap the whole thing up with Aristotle, matter and form. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the foundation of reality. To find our very first clues, we need to travel back thousands of years to ancient Greece and India. Okay, I want you to literally imagine you are the very first philosopher. You don't have a microscope, you definitely don't have a chemistry textbook. All you've got is your own rational mind and the physical world right in front of you. You look up at the stars, you look down at the dirt, and you ask this massive, foundational question. What exactly is the foundation of reality? Like, what is the independent, rock-bottom base for everything we consider to be real? This right here? This is the starting line for literally all of human philosophy and science. To even begin to answer that, we've got to define our core term for the day, which is substance. It's a Latin term that translates to substance. Now, in everyday conversation, you might hear substance and think of some gooey liquid or a weird chemical, but in our philosophical investigation, substance refers to the basic reality or the true essence of a thing. Early thinkers absolutely believed that if they could just properly apply reason to understand this substance, they could literally lay bare the absolute secrets of the cosmos. All right, moving into section 2, monism and pluralism. It is time to pit two completely different worldviews head to head. I want you to do this with me real quick. Just look around the room you're sitting in right now. Do you see one fundamental thing, or do you see a plurality of many different things? I mean, you probably see a desk, maybe a computer, a coffee mug, your own hands. Common sense absolutely screams that there's a plurality of beings. It's obvious, right? Well, hold on. Some of our earliest thinkers made a really compelling, totally rational case that everything you are seeing, the entire universe basically, is actually just one singular thing. And this wild view? It's known as monism. Take a look at this incredibly disparate group of thinkers known as the pre-Socratics. They all lived before Socrates, obviously, and they were all hardcore monists. But notice how wildly different their actual answers were. Thales went with water. Anaximenes chose air. Heraclitus argued for fire, and Parmenides, he went super abstract with just being. But here's the thing they all agreed on. Ultimate fundamental reality is singular. In fact, to even hold this view, they essentially had to argue that becoming, evolving, or changing from one thing to another isn't actually happening at the fundamental level. To them, primary being just simply cannot be generated or destroyed. Period. I know. It is so tempting to look at a guy who claims everything is water and just totally write him off. But listen to the rational consistency here. Thales literally just observed the world around him. He saw that heat is generated when water is removed. He noticed that literally all living things are nourished by water. He asked a simple question. What happens to a plant during a drought? Well, it dies. Therefore, he concluded water just must be the essential, fundamental substance of all being. He prioritized logical reason over what he saw as the empirical illusion of multiple separate objects. Up next, Section 3, Ancient Atomic Theories. We're going to shift our focus over to India, and later Greek thinkers, to see exactly how pluralism challenged that singular worldview. So, totally unlike the monists we just talked about, pluralists argued that fundamental reality actually consists of a whole bunch of different types of building blocks. Look at Empedocles, for instance. He's the guy who gave us the classic four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. But the pluralists that really truly resonate with how we see the world today, those would be Leucippus and Democritus. Democritus and Leucippus gave us this massive concept of atomos, which literally means uncuttable. They argued that true reality is actually an invisible world of these indivisible, eternal bits of matter. These invisible atoms have varying shapes and sizes, and they're just constantly bouncing around, joining together, separating. And it's that underlying motion that causes the visible objects we experience every single day. Things with color and taste and odor and sound. To them, the atoms are the true reality. And the visible objects, well, they're practically an illusion. But hey, this wasn't just happening over in Greece. Over in India, a 6th century BCE philosopher named Charya Kanad was having a totally parallel breakthrough. Legend actually has it that he was watching pilgrims scatter grains of rice at a temple. And through watching this, he realized that individual grains of rice are basically completely valueless when they're scattered alone. But when they're assembled together, they make a whole nourishing meal. He concluded that the beings we observe are exactly like this, just collections of indivisible particles, which he called anu. Building right on top of that, the Indian Nyaya Vaisheshika tradition gave us this absolutely brilliant step-by-step framework. Unlike the Greek view where atoms are just kind of randomly bumping into each other, this tradition argued for an incredibly structured composition. Step 1. Atoms already possess sensible qualities, like an earth atom has odor, a water atom has taste. Step 2. Similar atomic types logically join together into dyads. Step 3. They build up into triads. And finally, step 4, varying permutations build the physical wholes or objects we actually experience. It is an incredibly rational architectural blueprint for reality. Moving on to section 4, Plato and the cave. Let's jump to our next era and see how all this builds into one of the most famous analogies in human history. All right, now we're shifting away from strictly physical substances to ontology, which is the study of being itself. I really want you to put yourself in this scenario. Imagine you are a prisoner in Plato's famous allegory of the cave. You've been chained up your entire life, just staring at a wall. Behind you is a fire, and people walk by holding objects, casting shadows onto the wall right in front of you. Naturally, you would mistake those fading shadows for actual reality, right? But then, you escape. You crawl your way out of that cave. Your eyes adjust, and you see the blinding light of the sun for the very first time. You suddenly realize the shadows in the cave were just temporary, fading facsimiles. The sun is the true source of light, and more importantly, of knowledge. Plato used this awesome cave analogy to argue that our physical world is really just a world of temporary shadows. True reality, true substance, exists as eternal, unchanging forms completely outside our physical realm. For example, how do you actually know what a dog is? Think about it. You've seen spaniels and poodles and golden retrievers. They all look wildly different from each other. Yet beyond those physical differences, Plato argued there's an eternal, unchanging form of, well, dogness. That otherworldly form is the true substance that accounts for you being able to instantly recognize any dog you see walking down the street. And that brings us to section 5, Aristotle, matter, and form. Let's look at how Plato's star student had a massive disagreement with him, which leads us right into our final theoretical framework for the day. So right here is the crucial point of tension. Plato thought these perfect forms existed way out in some heavenly, otherworldly realm. But Aristotle, he completely challenged his teacher by asking a super practical question. How on earth could an immaterial, otherworldly form possibly cause change to material entities right here on Earth? Like, if dogness is just floating out in some heavenly realm, how does it physically influence the actual puppy playing in your living room? It doesn't make sense. So Aristotle brought reality firmly back down to Earth, arguing that forms are actually embedded directly within particular matter. To solve this whole problem of how change actually happens, Aristotle gave us his 4 causes, and he used a sculptor making a statue as an analogy. Just look at how logically this progresses. Step 1 is the material cause. That's just the raw marble itself. Step 2 is the formal cause. That's the idea or the vision inside the sculptor's mind. Step 3, the efficient cause. That's the actual physical chiseling and the artistic skill being used. And finally, step 4, the final cause. That is the ultimate purpose or the reason the sculpture was even made to begin with. Aristotle saw everything in nature working exactly through these 4 causes. And this brings us to honestly one of my absolute favorite concepts, hylomorphism. I know it's a massive word, but it simply means that substance is a perfect composite of form living directly within matter. The prefix hylo comes from the Greek word for wood or matter, and morphe means form. So, form isn't floating up in some Platonist heaven, it is inextricably bound deep inside the material itself, and that is what gives it shape, identity, and purpose. To make this totally concrete, just think about an acorn. An acorn doesn't need to look up to some invisible, otherworldly realm to figure out how to be an oak tree, right? Its inner form organically drives it. That form is embedded right inside the matter of the acorn, giving it purpose and pushing its movement from a beginning state of mere potentiality into the stunning, towering actuality of a mature oak tree. The magic is literally inside the seed. You can actually see this ultimate philosophical clash beautifully captured in Raphael's famous School of Athens fresco. If you look right at the center of that painting, you're going to see Plato on the left gesturing upward to the heavens. That represents his theory of forms, that ultimate reality is outside the earthly realm. But right beside him is Aristotle, gesturing downward, his hand flat. He is stressing that ultimate reality, the true substance, is embedded within each particular instance of matter, right here on Earth. No individual instances, no knowledge of the form. It's just a brilliant visual summary of the two greatest minds of antiquity. All right, class is almost dismissed, but I really want to leave you with a final provocative thought. I want you to do that exercise again. Look closely at an object near you, right now. Your coffee cup, your phone, literally anything. Ask yourself, what is the really real substance holding that thing together? Is its reality found entirely in its physical matter, like Thales thought? Is it in the invisible, uncuttable atoms bouncing around like Democritus and Kant argued? Or is its true reality found in an eternal form, giving it its identity, like Plato and Aristotle debated? Well, I'm going to let you be the philosopher who decides. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today.